Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the session on Toward a Fail-Safe Nuclear Strategy. My name is Michael Aird, and I'm excited to introduce you to the speaker for this session, Joan Rohlfing. Joan is the President and Chief Operating Officer of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, or NTI, which is a non-profit, non-partisan organization working to mitigate nuclear, biological, radiological, chemical, and cyber risks. She was part of the original team that created the mission and scope for NTI all the way back in 2000. And she played strategic roles in several of NTI's hallmark projects. Before joining NTI, she held senior positions with the US Department of Energy during the Clinton administration, as senior advisor for national security to the Secretary of Energy, and as director of the Office on Non-Proliferation and National Security. Today, Joan will be making a case for a new nuclear security paradigm, one that is no longer based on nuclear deterrence. We invite you to use the swap card platform during the session. On the right side panel, you can share your thoughts on the live discussion board while the session's going, and write and upvote questions for our speaker to answer at the end of the presentation, which will then shoot through to her for about 10 minutes. All right, without further ado, welcome Joan Rohlfing.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm going to just jump right into the talk. The premise of my talk is that the current strategy the world relies on for preventing nuclear war, called nuclear deterrence, is unacceptably risky, likely to fail, and when it fails, will not fail safely, but will fail catastrophically. This is both an unacceptable and an unnecessary risk. We can design a better, safer security system for preventing a nuclear holocaust, one that, if it fails, will not risk the future of humanity, one that, if it fails, will fail safe. This is doable and within our grasp. So let me start by defining what I mean by fail-safe first. Since fail-safe has a specific meaning to many in the nuclear weapons community, I feel like I need to call this out. It's not in that old 1950s sense that I'm using the term today. Today I'm using the term fail-safe in a broader engineering sense. The broader fail-safe definition is this: something that is fail-safe is designed or made in such a way that nothing dangerous can happen if a part of it goes wrong. I would say, at a minimum, we should be working to create a nuclear security system where a civilization-ending catastrophe is not possible if the system fails. So let me elaborate. I'm going to start first with a reflection on the risks inherent in the existing system. Currently, we rely on roughly, and the we here, I mean the global we, I don't just mean the United States. We rely on a roughly 70-year-old strategy called nuclear deterrence for preventing a nuclear weapons disaster. A system for managing the dangers of nuclear technology whose intellectual roots were defined by your great-grandparents' generation. So I'm speaking to those of you who are students here. Think about that, how archaic that is. What other field can you think of that is relying on a 70-plus-year-old operating system? In the years immediately following the advent of nuclear weapons after World War II, a group of US academics, government practitioners, and military officials reasoned that the best way to prevent a nuclear attack was to threaten retaliation against an adversary with a nuclear attack of our own. The thinking was that as long as we maintained an assured survivable capability to respond to an enemy nuclear attack with a massive counterattack, that any attack against us would be futile, and a nuclear war could be successfully deterred. This strategy was based on a game theory model and assumed that each party would behave rationally, that each party would have adequate time to make rational decisions, that we would operate with perfect information, and that we could have confidence in the reality of our operating systems. Given the technology of that era, it assumed that nuclear weapons would be delivered in slow-flying bombers, that they could be recalled once launched, and that we, the US, had one principal adversary, the Soviet Union, who would presumably behave rationally and not intentionally trigger Armageddon. So fast forward to today, that's not the world we live in anymore. We have an extremely complex system of 9 nuclear states with some 15,000 nuclear weapons and growing. It's possible that not all players in this deterrence game are rational. We have delivery vehicles that are so fast that leaders essentially have only 5 to 7 minutes to decide whether to launch a nuclear attack. Our early warning and weapon systems may or may not be reliable given their cyber vulnerabilities. We have an infodemic of disinformation and the potential for deep fakes on social media that could further distort the context of a nuclear event. In addition, historically high political tensions between key actors, for example, the US and Russia, or US-China, or India-Pakistan. All these challenges to nuclear deterrence, they're manifold. And what if the nuclear warning systems are successfully sabotaged by a cyber attack and erroneously triggers a counterattack? What if there's a false warning of an incoming attack during a period of political crisis? What if terrorists acquire a crude nuclear device? Do we really think they will be deterred from using one themselves? What if one of the technical components in the system fails, or if there's human error? Nuclear deterrence strategy was not designed to address many of these scenarios. Nuclear deterrence is also premised on the rather fanciful belief, in my view, that the system is so robust that it will work perfectly in perpetuity. But there's a long history of near accidents and warning signals that prove that elements of the system are in fact fallible. Let me just cite one. There are dozens of them, but let me just cite one. In November of 1979, the US National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, received a call in the middle of the night telling him that the North American Air Defense Command was monitoring several hundred incoming Soviet missiles. Now, it turns out, there was a very suspense-filled, panicked period of time over the next 15, 20 minutes. It turns out in the end that what happened was that training software was inexplicably loaded into the main displays at both the North American Air Defense Command and also the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. Took a while to figure that out, and fortunately, reasonable minds prevailed, and there was no retaliatory strike launched on the basis of this misinformation. There's a long history of similar events. Do we really want to continue to rely on a strategy that's premised on the threat of mass annihilation and on a rational actor system working perfectly forever? It's time to build a new nuclear security paradigm that doesn't threaten to end our species and can't cause a civilizational catastrophe or extinction, but rather fails safe. So I want to describe the key design elements of this newer, safer system. But before I do that, I also want to say just a few words about the uncertainty within this community about the risks of a nuclear war. The truth is, we still have significant gaps in our understanding of the range of effects of a nuclear war. But I think it's safe to say that nuclear war would not just be a climate event, that is a period of so-called nuclear winter or nuclear autumn, but it would be a massive social, economic, health, and governance event. There's a lot we don't know about any one aspect of these vulnerabilities, let alone how some of the resulting dynamics might interact to bring about a catalytic trigger for other existential threats, especially for bio threats and climate. While there's some very good work being done on modeling nuclear winter, we still have a very limited understanding about the implications of nuclear winter on secondary systems such as critical infrastructure, trade disruption, the global economy, human health, the spread of diseases, the harm or collapse of fragile ecosystems, governance structures, and the potential for civil unrest. So it's a long list of things we don't know about. Clearly, more research is needed on the societal effects of nuclear use. As Martin Hellman, a Stanford emeritus professor, wrote recently, he asks, can we responsibly bet humanity's existence on a strategy for which the risk of failure is totally unknown? One thing we know for sure is that a nuclear catastrophe would have a dramatic, horrific, prompt effect on potentially millions of people who are innocent. and there would be likely many more knock-on effects. For those unlucky enough to survive the catastrophe, quality of life would be very different. This is not just wild speculation. There's lots of historical, empirical evidence from volcanic events throughout history that show how the resulting climate disruptions could have broad societal effects. Okay, so how do we do better? What might this new fail-safe strategy or fail-safe system look like? For starters, I would posit that it should be built on the design principle that failure of the system can't threaten to end humanity, or even set it back by years, decades, or centuries. The new system should be premised on the fundamental belief that, and this is to use Toby Ord's argument, that we owe it to the generations before us and the many generations that come after us. We owe it to them to enable future humans to exist and flourish. Are we going to let these weapons control us, or are we going to control them? My vision for what a future nuclear security paradigm should look like is simple. We need to put in place an effective control regime for preventing nuclear use by controlling nuclear technology that could be used to make nuclear weapons. 70 years ago, we didn't have the capacity to do that. Today, we do. We've learned a lot over the last 70 years about how to monitor, detect, and regulate nuclear technology that could be used for weapons purposes. The need to monitor nuclear technology is something that humans are going to need to do in perpetuity. We cannot uninvent nuclear weapons or erase our knowledge of them. There are peaceful applications of the technology that are also here to stay. We just need to do a better job of getting our arms around them. This is not an impossible task. It's totally tractable. We have powerful tools to track every aspect of the nuclear fuel cycle, from the mining of uranium to the production of plutonium and uranium to the deployment of weapons delivery systems and more. In fact, most of these tools are already in place today. They're just not universally deployed, and they're not deployed at scale. So technology is key. We can harness the power of existing and new technology for problem solving, and we can develop even more effective detectors and sensors to support the verification and monitoring architecture we need for the future. For example, in an age of big data and machine learning, there is the potential to detect patterns of behavior by states that make it almost impossible to hide the signatures of a nuclear weapons program. Of course, new governance arrangements will also need to be developed. But technology and governance alone are not enough. Even more important will be creating the political space for change, shifting the Overton window. We need to start by shifting the deeply entrenched belief system held by nuclear weapon states that a nuclear system premised on mass annihilation is the best way to keep us safe. And instead, we need to demand a new system that can't cause a civilizational catastrophe, or possibly even extinction if it fails. Your generation can help build the awareness that's needed. You can help build the momentum for change, and you can help create the intellectual capital we need to define a better paradigm so that humanity can flourish and reach its full potential. Fixing the nuclear threat is a totally tractable issue. So here's what you can do. Get involved. There's room for everyone at this conference to get involved. Start by educating yourself. Become a force multiplier by helping to raise awareness about the nuclear threat. Ask your elected officials at any level, whether it be local, regional, state, international, ask them what they're doing to prevent a nuclear weapons catastrophe. Ask them why we continue to accept the risks to humanity of our current system. Why do we allow ourselves to be held hostage by these weapons? Second thing, be a part of the solution. Come work in this field. Find an intern program, work for your government, join an NGO, become an organizer, write op-eds. There's so many different ways to contribute, and so much talent is needed. This field is poised on the edge of a transformation, and we need your help to bring that about. And finally, we need your help in creating the new paradigm that I just talked about. There's room and need for more research. There's need for more scholarship. There's need for a pipeline of next generation scholars to build off of the strategy that your great-grandfathers developed that we're still living with today. This is your generation's opportunity to put us in a better place. So let's get to work on that safer paradigm, one that if it fails, will fail safe. And that concludes my remarks, and I'm open to Q&A now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that. So yeah, I thought that was a very interesting presentation, and we got a lot of questions. So I'm just going to get right into them. People finding lots to pick your brain about.
Right.
So I think the top one, and this is also the one I was thinking of asking, is basically what are the main barriers to this actually happening, this new paradigm being adopted, and like how do we get from where we are to there? What are the steps along the way, especially while some states will still be using the old paradigm?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I think there's two principal barriers. One is the utter lack of public awareness and public engagement on this issue. This issue is, I would say, in government circles, despite the gravity of it, a nearly invisible issue because there's no mechanism for holding our government leaders accountable. There's no one demanding that we move away from this unacceptable system. It's like the dog that didn't bark because by some miracle of chance, we've survived the last 75 years without a horrific catastrophe. And so it's out of sight, out of mind. So it's really important that we work to raise awareness and build some public engagement. The second is the existing paradigm is, I describe it as a belief system, is a very deeply entrenched belief system among the small number of leaders and elites within governments that are responsible for maintaining the weapons and the system. And in order to move beyond this deep-seated belief that the threat of mass annihilation is going to keep us safe into the future, we need to begin building a better story, a better narrative of what's possible, and helping to replace that belief system with a better one.
So that emphasized, I think, like public advocacy and like changing the beliefs of the leaders, which I think raises another question, which is how much impact would there be? Well, so how do we get this to happen in countries that aren't liberal democracies? And how good is it if we just have it happen in liberal democracies? Like, do you think if we just get the US to focus on this paradigm, the rest of the world will follow? Like, can the US push that sufficiently?
So we need more than just liberal democracies. This is a whole of world problem. And the good news is the number of states with nuclear weapons in the world is limited today. So far, there are only 9 states. The rest of the world don't have these weapons, and great number of states as non-nuclear weapon states are pushing for a move toward a world without nuclear weapons. Not only through the Non-Proliferation Treaty, where all nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states alike have bound ourselves to work toward a world without nuclear weapons, but also through the recently entered into force ban treaty, a new treaty that entered into force in January of this year. So lots and lots of countries are already, in some ways, they're there. They're living within a different belief structure. I do think the U.S. is absolutely pivotal. The United States and Russia together have a special responsibility because we have 91% of the world's nuclear weapons, but in particular, the U.S. has, I would say, an even higher obligation because we created these weapons, and also because US leadership in the world, even still, after the last 4 years, is important. The US, I think, is widely believed, and I believe, to be the strongest military power on earth. If we believe we need these weapons for our security, who are we to tell other countries that they shouldn't have these weapons or that they don't need them? So I think if the US were to declare that it wanted to move to a new security paradigm, it would go a long way in bringing the rest of the world in that direction. And just last thought on this topic, there's so much more to say. We're not going to be able to flip a switch and move from a world of nuclear deterrence to one where suddenly we have a control regime in place. This is something that is going to need to occur over time, and with all of the nuclear states moving together in this direction. For as long as nuclear weapons exist in the world, we'll want to make sure that there's some kind of deterrence stability, but there are measures we can take right away that can get us to a much safer place where we greatly reduce the risk of an existential threat.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this session. But thank you, Joan, for that wonderful session and your time with us today.